Tonight we travel back, way back, to the crackling heart of a Viking village, where dawn stares through smoke and frost. You can almost taste the air, a mix of damp wool, pine sap, and yesterday's fish stew. The longhouse breathes around you, timbers creaking softly like an old ship at rest. Somewhere a baby hiccups, someone stokes the hearth, and there, by the furthest wall, you spot a cluster of small shapes laid neatly beside a blanket. Tiny carved horses. A boat with oars no bigger than a thumbnail. And what might be a wooden bear, worn smooth by years of small hands. You realize this is the Viking equivalent of a toy chest, though, admittedly, made entirely of splinters. You crouch down, careful not to disturb the sleeping family. The toys are light in your palm, faintly scented with smoke and lard polish. They aren't just playthings, they're echoes of the adult world carved small enough for practice. You think about the real longships moored down by the frozen fjord, the axes leaning by the doorway, the constant thrum of survival here. Every toy seems to whisper, "You'll need to know this soon." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The child stirring beside you yawns and reaches for one of the carved horses. The creature's legs are stubby, more symbolic than realistic, but that doesn't matter. It gallops across the dirt floor in a clumsy race against an imaginary foe. The horse's head, nicked from a birch branch, catches a gleam from the fire. A parent mumbles something about chores, but no one stops the play. Even in a world of endless labor and looming winters, there's room for wooden horses to trot across the morning. Outside, frost paints the grass silver. Chickens mutter. You duck through the low door frame into the pale Nordic sunrise, the air biting your nose. In the distance, men shoulder axes, their cloaks snapping in the wind. Yet just behind them, a handful of children crouch near the well, dragging sticks through the mud. They've built a village of their own, tiny houses scratched into dirt, toy ships docked by puddles, a horse tied to an imaginary post. The giggles rising from the scene are startlingly modern. You can almost hear echoes of playground chatter from 1,000 years later. Historians still argue whether Viking children were allowed to play much at all. Some think chores consumed every waking moment, while others point to archaeological finds, miniature boats, wooden animals, even carved figurines, as proof that play was part of life, not apart from it. The truth, like most Viking things, likely sits somewhere in the smoky middle. You watch one small boy poke a stick through a chunk of wood, shaping a crude ship. His fingers are red from cold, but his grin is fierce. Another child joins in, adding tiny wooden men to the deck. They call out commands in high-pitched mockery of the grown sailors, to the west, to plunder the geese. It's all giggles until the stick ship capsizes into a puddle, and the crew goes down squealing. Nearby, a woman watches them with a half-smile while kneading bread dough. She knows that, soon enough, those same hands will grip oars instead of toys. But for now, this imitation of adulthood is harmless and necessary. Every scraped knee and broken toy is training, physical rehearsal for survival, and emotional rehearsal for courage. You notice something odd. One of the toys isn't made from birch or pine but from driftwood, its surface darkened by salt. Someone has carved faint lines along its hull, almost like runes. Was this the work of a father helping his son, or a mother secretly indulging her daughter's curiosity about ships? Historians still debate whether Viking girls ever joined sailing crews. Evidence is murky, but there's always one bold kid somewhere defying the script. Inside the longhouse again, the day brightens in stripes through the smoke hole. The family stares fully awake. Someone hands you a bowl of porridge thicker than modern concrete, and you politely pretend to enjoy it. The children resume their play, using the wooden toys as characters in a story. Part battle, part farm chores, part mystery involving an invisible troll under the table. Their laughter mingles with the creak of drying clothes and the pop of the hearth. Then, unexpectedly, one little girl grabs a wooden horse and announces, in perfect seriousness, "Mine can talk." The others scoff. "Prove it." She nods solemnly and whispers into its ear. For a moment, the longhouse feels suspended in something timeless, a place where imagination outruns cold, hunger, and history. The adults let it happen, smiling faintly but saying nothing. They've seen enough winters to know that stories keep the dark away as surely as fire. One of the elders, his beard frosted, his hands scarred from years at sea, leans against the wall, whittling another toy. His knife moves with quiet certainty, shaving away thin curls that fall like pale feathers. The sound is soft, rhythmic, and oddly soothing. He's carving a small bird, maybe a gull or raven. He doesn't speak, but his eyes flick toward the children now and then. Perhaps he's remembering his own carved toys, long burned or buried or lost in some far-off fjord. By midday, the children are outside again, their toys tucked into fur-lined pouches. They'll spend the next hours chasing one another through melting snow, their laughter swallowed by wind. The toys, though crude, will travel with them everywhere, tiny companions in a harsh world. You stand by the doorway, the smell of smoke in your hair, watching them vanish into the mist. Something about it all feels impossibly fragile and endlessly familiar. The Viking world may be gone, but this small rebellion of play against duty, belongs to every age. As the sun finally lifts above the mountains, you turn back inside, where that old man's carving still lies unfinished on the floor. A small bird, caught mid-flight in wood, waiting for someone to pick it up and let it fly. You wander further into the day, following the scent of sap and the soft rasp of metal on wood. Outside the longhouse, a cluster of children squats near a stump, each gripping a small blade dull enough to make any modern parent faint. They are whittling, tiny apprentices to the art of patience. You crouch beside them, and the air smells sharply of birch shavings and thawing earth. The pile of curls grows like a blonde beard at their feet. One boy squints, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth as he tries to carve a horse's leg that keeps coming out suspiciously like a turnip. A gray-haired woman, perhaps his grandmother, chuckles softly. "Better a turnip than no horse," she says, and the child grins. You can almost see the rhythm of old hands teaching young ones how to guide the knife away from the body, how to read the grain, how to sand rough edges with a bit of wool or skin. Each toy begins as a mistake. Each mistake becomes a story. You pick up a fallen shaving, its curve gleaming like a frozen wave, and realize something quietly astonishing. These children are training their eyes and fingers to understand with the way modern kids learn pixels and buttons. The motion of carving connects them directly to the living forest, to the same materials used for ships, tools, and homes. Historians still argue whether Viking children had designated tools or used dulled-down adult ones. Some excavations suggest smaller knives existed, worn smooth from little hands. Others think children borrowed from parents under strict supervision, a debatable phrase when your supervision involves a distracted goat and a sibling with a hammer. A little girl beside you brandishes her creation. "It's a cat," she announces proudly. The cat looks like an abstract cloud on a stick, but no one corrects her. She strokes it gently, humming a tune you don't recognize. Maybe it's something her mother sings while weaving. Her brother laughs and carves a dog that ends up as a short-legged blob. When the two animals fight, their wooden heads clack together like castanets. The sound makes the older children glance up and smirk. You feel the rhythm of the place settle in. No clocks, no hurry. The only measure of time is light across the snow and how many wood curls pile beneath the stump. Someone's stomach growls, someone else sneezes, and the work continues. Even when the wind bites, no one complains. Vikings learned early that the world doesn't soften itself for comfort. You have to make comfort with your own hands. A boy about 10 leans close to show you something special. His toy has faint lines scratched into it, marks that look like runes. He points at them proudly. This says strong horse. You can't tell if it actually does, but you nod solemnly. He grins, satisfied. Later, archaeologists will find toys just like this, rune-marked animals buried in forgotten homes. Scholars still debate whether those carvings were mere decoration or small charms meant to protect the toy's owner. Either way, the impulse feels the same, to make meaning from play, to turn wood into memory. As you watch, one of the younger children slips and nicks his thumb. A sharp intake of breath, a bead of red, and then a soft scolding from the grandmother. She wraps the cut with wool and kisses the top of his head. That's how the gods teach attention, she murmurs. You can't help smiling. There's a blend of practicality and myth in everything here. Injuries aren't just accidents, they are lessons dressed in folklore. The sky above is a pale pewter, seagulls wheeling inland, carrying the scent of the sea. Beyond the village fence, you spot a stack of old ship planks waiting to be chopped into firewood. One of the older boys eyes them thoughtfully. Wood from a raiding ship, he whispers. Maybe it remembers fighting. Another laughs. Then let's carve heroes from it. And off they run, dragging the smaller kids with them, pockets jingling with dull knives and mischief. You follow. The wind is sharper now, carrying hints of smoke and salt. The group settles near the planks, chattering. They start sawing and hacking pieces off, each one imagining their creation already alive. Horses, shields, birds, and something that might be a dragon if you squint. They work quickly, swapping jokes that wouldn't impress their parents. Hey, Bjorn, your horse looks seasick. Better than yours, it's got 4 heads. A few minutes later, one of them holds up a small, lopsided ship hull. It's crude but sturdy. The others cheer. Someone suggests testing it in the fjord once the ice melts. There's no fear of failure, only the thrill of trying. You realize that every nick and gouge here carries a sense of ownership, of craft. These toys aren't purchased, they are born under calloused fingers and laughter. The grandmother arrives again, shaking her head at the mess of shavings but smiling all the same. When I was small, she says, we carved spoons before we could carve toys. My brother made a spoon with 3 handles. Said it was for sharing. The children giggle. You do too. A good joke, a good toy, same purpose, to make hard lives a bit softer. Evening shadows creep in early. The children gather their finished pieces, wooden cats, ships, unidentifiable blobs that everyone politely calls cows. They hold them like treasures. A few toss theirs into a small basket by the doorway. You suspect they'll be sold or traded later, little crafts for travelers passing through. You glance back once more at the stump, at the shavings glinting under fading light. They look like gold scattered across the ground. For a second, it feels like the whole village glows with that quiet pride, the joy of making something from nothing, of leaving a mark that will outlast play. Somewhere nearby, someone starts a slow, rhythmic hammering on a wooden frame. It's soothing, hypnotic. The children's laughter fades into murmurs. You realize the lesson here isn't just about carving wood, it's about carving patience, resilience, imagination. The Vikings didn't just build ships to cross seas, they built toys to cross childhood. And as you stand there in the twilight, watching the last curls of smoke rise from the hearth, you think maybe, just maybe, that's the most human thing of all. By the next morning, the frost has turned the grass into silver needles. You trudge through it carefully, boots crunching as if stepping on sugar. The village hums with slow life, chickens pecking at scraps, dogs shaking off sleep, a a man swearing softly at a stubborn goat. But just beyond the smoke from the cook fires, the real noise begins. The high, breathless shouts of children launching into war. At first you think something serious is happening. Wooden swords clash, miniature shields thump, and battle cries echo through the cold air. But then you catch sight of their army, a dozen scruffy kids, each armed with a stick or carved blade, their hair wild, their laughter louder than the gulls. This isn't battle. It's rehearsal for being brave. You sidestep to avoid a stray arrow, actually a twig, and spot two boys bent over a puddle. Floating there is a miniature ship, its hull carved from pine and its sail, a scrap of linen stolen from someone's sleeve, fluttering proudly. The vessel lists dangerously, yet its tiny crew, acorns with charcoal faces, holds formation. One of the boys pushes it gently with a stick, shouting orders in an exaggerated adult tone. To the west. The treasure's mine, you cowards. The other boy splashes water dramatically, capsizing the ship with glee. Both fall back in the mud, howling with laughter. A nearby girl, watching from a rock, rolls her eyes. You're terrible sailors, she says, picking up her own smaller boat. She's carved dragon heads at both ends, clearly inspired by the real longships moored by the fjord. She sets it in the water, and it glides perfectly straight. The boys stop laughing. You cheated, one mutters. No, she says sweetly, I just built it better. You can't help grinning. The mud may be cold, but the pride here burns bright. It's strange and beautiful to see these little Vikings play fighting their way into courage. Historians still argue whether Viking boys were given toys specifically to imitate warfare, or if that's just what kids naturally turned everything into. What's certain is that archaeologists have unearthed dozens of small wooden swords and shields, some ornately carved, others worn smooth from countless mock duels. Some even bear runic initials, proof that their makers wanted their toys to feel real. You walk among them, ducking low as the war escalates. Wooden ships become siege engines, puddles turn to oceans, and sticks transform into spears of legend. One child shouts, I am Olaf the Fearless, and promptly slips, landing flat on his back. The others erupt in laughter. Olaf the Fallen, someone yells. Even in Viking times, comedy was cruel. A few older children, more serious, stage a grander drama. They've built a fort out of driftwood planks, complete with a gate made from an upside-down barrel. You watch them line up their toy warriors on the ramparts, wooden figures about the length of your finger, each carved with primitive helmets and shields. Some even have painted eyes, done with soot and spit. The detail surprises you. There's something almost tender in how carefully they've been made. Then comes the inevitable siege. The attackers rush the fort, yelling nonsense war cries that mix Norse and pure imagination. The defenders counter with pebbles lobbed by slings made of wool. One lands near your foot. Another bounces off a sheep, who looks unimpressed. For all the chaos, there's joy in every moment. Joy in pretending, in mimicking the world of adults but safely contained within laughter. Nearby, a small boy sits apart, carving in concentration. You crouch beside him. His toy isn't a ship or sword, it's a tiny man holding a round shield. My father's away, he explains quietly, not looking up. He said to guard the farm. He turns the figure over in his hands. So I made a guard. His voice is steady, but you can sense the longing in it. You nod, unsure what to say. Sometimes a toy is just a toy. Sometimes it's a promise made of wood. A gust of wind cuts through the field, scattering sawdust and straw. The children barely notice. They're deep in their world now, fighting, rebuilding, narrating. One of the girls takes charge, declaring herself Queen of Iceford. Her rule lasts exactly 3 minutes before she's dramatically overthrown by a rival with better aim. Somewhere in the confusion, a wooden sword splinters. The child holding it gasps, staring at the break as if a limb's been lost. The older boy who built it kneels down, picks up both halves, and says gently, "We can fix it." He pulls a strip of sinew from his pouch and binds it tight. The sword, though scarred, becomes stronger for it. You file that image away. There's something poetic in how these children learn resilience before they even learn to read. As the sun climbs higher, their energy fades a little. Mud splattered, laughing, they flop onto the grass to rest. One uses a broken shield as a pillow. Another idly sails her ship again, tracing lazy circles in the puddle. The noise dies down to murmurs and yawns. You settle nearby, watching the clouds drift. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer strikes iron, a blacksmith shaping tools, maybe weapons. The rhythm echoes the games you just witnessed. Everything here, play, craft, battle, flows into everything else. Childhood isn't separate from adulthood, it's just the smaller version, carved from the same wood. A younger child sits up suddenly and declares, "When I grow up, I'll have the biggest ship." Another chimes in, "I'll fight dragons." A third says, "I'll stay home and make toys for everyone." They laugh, arguing about whose dream is braver. And you think to yourself, maybe they're all right. Historians still argue whether Viking children were expected to follow strict gender roles. The truth probably varied from fjord to fjord. But here, right now, you see boys and girls carving, fighting, and laughing side by side. The future hasn't sorted them yet. By the time the shadows lengthen, the war zone has become quiet again. The puddle fleets are drying in the sun, tiny ships resting after glorious adventures. You imagine them centuries later, buried under layers of soil, waiting to be rediscovered by curious archaeologists who'll hold them in gloved hands and wonder, who played with this? Who laughed here? You brush a smear of mud from your sleeve, stretch, and take one last look at the children. They are already gathering their things, half tired, half triumphant. Tomorrow they'll do it all again, with new stories, new battles, new worlds built from the same simple pieces of wood. You breathe in the scent of pine and smoke and realize how familiar it feels, how universal that impulse is, to make heroes out of scraps and time out of play. The Viking world might be long gone, but its children still echo in every backyard battle since. The morning mist curls low across the village as you step into the weaving hall, where the air hums with the soft rhythm of wooden looms and quiet gossip. It smells of flax and smoke, and you can taste wool in the air. Here, among baskets of yarn and half-mended tunics, the girls gather. But don't let the calm fool you. This is the Viking version of a design studio, and the creativity is as fierce as any raid. In the corner, two young girls sit cross-legged beside a low bench. Between them lies a small figure carved from pine, round head, simple face, no more than a thumb's length tall. A doll. Its features are rough, but someone's painted faint dots for eyes, and a little smile that's more hopeful than accurate. Around its wooden body is a scrap of red cloth tied with string. She's Freyja, one gal announces proudly. She's the goddess of love and cats. The other girl frowns. No, she's Astrid. My mother says Freyja wouldn't wear that color. You can't help chuckling softly as they argue about their deity's wardrobe. The doll becomes a miniature battlefield of theology and fashion. A few feet away, another child quietly sews together a small tunic for her doll, using sinuous thread. Her stitches are uneven, her fingers pricked, but she hums contentedly. A mother glances over and nods, proud, but pretending not to show it. Historians still argue whether Viking girls actually played with dolls or if these carved figures were idols for ritual. Archaeologists have found them in both graves and household middens, sometimes alongside tools and jewelry. Were they toys or tokens of faith? Maybe both. In a world where the divine and the daily intertwined, even play could double as prayer. You sit down beside the girls, and one shyly offers you a doll. The wood feels warm, smoothed by many hands. Its back is slightly flat from long use. You imagine the generations of fingers that might have held it, children whispering secrets, mothers mending its clothes, maybe even a father carving it late at night by the fire. The doll is more than a toy, it's a small anchor of comfort, a portable friend in a world that doesn't often slow down to be gentle. Nearby, another group is deep in a different kind of game. They're hosting a feast, arranging tiny wooden dishes and bone cups on the dirt floor. Their dolls sit stiffly around a pretend fire, one missing a leg, another bald from an unfortunate run-in with a puppy. "You are the guest from across the sea," says one child solemnly to her friend. "You must bring gifts or face the gods' displeasure." The friend sighs, dramatically producing a lump of wood. "It's gold," she insists. The others ooh appreciatively. A grandmother laughs from her loom. "You bargain like chieftains already," she says, not unkindly. The girls beam, taking the compliment seriously. You can see it clearly. Even here, even now, their play mirrors the structure of adult life: negotiation, hospitality, alliance, and the occasional act of divine bribery. The dolls aren't all human, either. One girl shows you a wooden cat, its body little more than a stick with carved ears, but its tail carefully smoothed into a curl. "It's Frager's cat," she explains. "It brings luck." Another clutches a bird with a crooked beak, saying it knows the way to Valhalla. You can't help but marvel how these children's imaginations stretch across worlds, from the smoky longhouse to the glowing halls of the gods, without missing a beat. A sudden burst of laughter makes you turn. A boy, mud-streaked and mischievous, has crept in from outside, holding a wooden sword. He pokes one of the dolls, declaring, "A raid. A raid on the feast." The girls shriek in mock outrage, defending their table with spoons and ladles. For a glorious, chaotic moment, dolls fly, laughter echoes, and a cat streaks past with a stolen scrap of fabric. The boy retreats, triumphant, but not unscathed. A doll's tunic hits him square in the face. The room dissolves into giggles. Even the mothers can't hide their smiles. "Better practice on dolls than on neighbors," one mutters, returning to her spinning wheel. When the laughter fades, the play continues more quietly. One girl, perhaps 7 or 8, begins brushing her doll's wooden hair with a comb carved from bone. Her movements are careful, almost reverent. You realize this act, so simple, so universal, is a rehearsal for care. In a life where tenderness is a rare luxury, these moments of softness matter. Historians still argue about the role of affection in Viking families. The sagas paint them as stoic, battle-hardened people, yet artifacts like these dolls whisper something gentler. Someone took time to make them smooth, to paint their faces, to carve small smiles. There's love in that, quiet but enduring. As the day drifts into afternoon, the weaving hall glows gold with light filtering through slats. The girls start tucking their dolls away, into fur pouches, under benches, behind baskets. Some will sleep beside them tonight, others will be forgotten until next play. But none are discarded. You sense that each carries its own small soul, its own secret story. You rise and step outside again, the brightness momentarily blinding after the dim warmth within. The sound of distant hammering and barking dogs fills the air. The same boy who raided the feast runs past, clutching a broken spoon like a trophy. Behind him, the girls shout mock curses invoking Thor and Freyja, their voices bright and strong. You smile. Even here, amid wool, smoke, and splinters, childhood feels eternal. The tools may change, the gods may fade, but the games of imagination? They endure. And somewhere in the long dusk of history, you can almost hear it still. The quiet clatter of a wooden doll's feet, running through time, chased by laughter. The day leans toward evening, but the village doesn't rest. You follow the faint glow of a hearth, drawn by bursts of laughter and the rhythmic scrape of something sliding across wood. Inside a longhouse, a circle of older children and a few adults are huddled close to the fire, their faces orange in the flicker. The heat hits you first, then the smell, smoke, mead, and something faintly sweet, like roasted barley. And in the middle of it all sits a game board, carved with crisscrossing lines. Small wooden pieces, smooth discs, some light, some dark, scatter across it like stars. On a fatafel, someone murmurs beside you. The name rolls off the tongue like thunder in a cave. The Viking chess. A game of kings, captives, and cunning. You crouch down to watch. One boy, older and clearly proud of his skill, moves a carved piece shaped like a tiny throne. The others lean forward as if the move might change the weather. His opponent, a freckled girl with quick hands and an even quicker smile, grins. "You'll regret that," she says, and slides one of her defenders into place. The tension rises. A single game piece tumbles over, someone snorts. The fire crackles. Then, check, she shouts triumphantly, though that word doesn't exist here yet. The others groan, the boy protests, and someone jokes about calling in Odin as referee. You can't help smiling. The scene feels so familiar, half competition, half comedy. The game board itself is beautiful, squares scorched with heat for contrast, the corners marked with faint symbols. The pieces are carved from scraps of antler and wood, worn from many winters of play. These were found in burial mounds too, game sets buried beside warriors, proof that even in the afterlife, no one wanted to be bored. Historians still argue whether Onafatafel was purely entertainment or a tool to teach strategy to young warriors. Maybe both. Vikings loved dual-purpose things, axes that built and killed, ships that carried trade and terror, games that trained minds for war. A smaller child sitting nearby watches the older players with rapt attention. His fingers fidget over a makeshift board scratched into the date, tiny pebbles as game pieces. You watch him mimic every move, his imagination filling in the rest. When one of the older kids notices, she nudges him closer, whispering advice like a secret spell. He beams. You realize how knowledge here isn't just taught, it's absorbed through nearness, like warmth from the hearth. The game continues, and with each move, stories bloom around it. One player swears the board came from a jarl who won it in Ireland. Another insists it was carved from the mast of a raiding ship. Nonsense, says a third. It's from a barrel that leaked. Laughter ripples through the room. You feel yourself relaxing too, lulled by the rhythm of turns and teasing. There's something hypnotic about the clicking of wood on wood, the sound of centuries passing quietly under human fingers. As the fire pops, one of the elders joins the circle. His beard is streaked with gray, his hands knotted from work, but his eyes still gleam like a boy's. "When I was your age," he says, "I played taffel against my brother on the deck of a ship. Every wave was a move. Every splash was an omen." The children listen, wide-eyed. "And who won?" someone asks. He chuckles. "The sea." They laugh, and the old man grins. He starts another game, this time against the quick-handed girl who beat everyone else. You can tell he's not holding back. They trade moves like sword thrusts, calculated, merciless, yet oddly kind. When she finally traps his king, the room erupts in cheers. The elder raises his hands in surrender. "A true warrior," he declares. "But don't challenge me after mead." The firelight softens everything, turning laughter into gold. Around the edges of the room, smaller games spark up, dice clattering on wood, children inventing their own rules, one group gambling with dried beans they pretend are silver. There's a hum of togetherness that feels ancient and strangely modern, like a family board game night with more fur and fewer rules. Historians still argue over how Onofatafel spread across the Norse world. Some say it came from the Celts, others from Rome, carried north by traders and made rougher by weather and whiskey. What's certain is that Vikings cherished games that rewarded patience, memory, and nerve, the same traits that kept them alive at sea. You glance at the girl who won, now explaining her tactics to a younger child. "You can't just rush," she says. "You have to think like the enemy." Her tone is firm, but not unkind. She's learning strategy, but also something subtler: how to lead, how to teach. The fire dips lower. Someone yawns. A few of the younger ones stretch out on the fur rugs, eyes drooping. The game pieces gleam faintly in the dimming light. The elder gathers them up, dropping each one into a pouch with a soft clink. "No lost pieces," he warns. "The gods count everything." A practical reminder, and maybe a bit of superstition for good measure. As the others drift to their sleeping spots, you linger by the board. The pattern still glows faintly in the firelight, like constellations on the ground. You trace a finger over one of the lines and feel the groove, worn smooth by generations of hands. A simple game, yet a whole philosophy carved into wood. Defend your king, trust your allies, plan 3 moves ahead, and don't take life too seriously. You'll lose eventually, but you can still laugh on the way down. Outside, the wind has softened. The moon catches on the frost, and for a heartbeat, the quiet feels holy. The children sleep, dreaming of victories and voyages, and maybe of the next rematch. You smile and step back into the cold, feeling the same warmth you'd get after a perfect move. Small, satisfying, endlessly human. By dawn, the snow has crusted into a thin shell of ice that cracks with each step. The air tastes like iron and pine. You can hear the distant ring of an axe striking wood somewhere across the valley, steady, unhurried, eternal. Yet closer by, a different rhythm emerges, the laughter of children and the faint drag of something heavy over the frozen ground. You follow the sound to the edge of the village, where a boy and his sister are hauling a small wooden sled up a slope that barely deserves the name hill. The thing looks more like a tray with runners, its surface scarred by use. The boy gestures proudly. "Father made it," he says. "It's fast." His sister snorts. "It's slow." You take an instinctive step back as they hop on together, argue mid-descent, and promptly crash into a snowbank. Both emerge shrieking with laughter, covered in white powder. You smile. This is no luxury toy from a market. It's carved from leftover planks, bound with sinew, and patched with a piece of antler where one runner cracked last winter. But it works. More than that, it teaches. Because in this world, everything teaches something. As they drag the sled back up, you notice how the boy braces his legs, how the girl leans her weight against the rope. Movements that mirror adults hauling nets, pulling timbers, or steering ships against the wind. Play is practice. It's a quiet apprenticeship disguised as fun. Historians still argue whether Viking toys were intentionally educational or simply improvised entertainment. Yet when you watch these children hauling, steering, balancing, it's obvious. Every game is training for something real. No one calls it that, but their bodies remember. Another pair of kids approaches, dragging a miniature cart built from scrap wood and goat hide strips. A wooden cow rides inside. Well, half a cow, missing its rear legs. The smaller child pushes it proudly while the older one shouts orders like a merchant on market day. "Faster!" The buyer's waiting. The cow wobbles perilously, and they howl with laughter. But again, Beneath the silliness lies muscle memory, grip, balance, endurance. These games sculpt small bodies into future farmers, fishers, sailors. You follow as the group moves toward the frozen stream. Here, the ice gleams blue-gray under the weak sun. Someone's father has cleared a patch smooth, and now the older children take turns sliding across it on wooden skates, flat boards bound to their boots with leather thongs. They push off with poles, spinning and wobbling dangerously. The sledders watch, eyes wide. "Let us try." "Too small," says an older boy, grinning. "You'll break your noses." Which, of course, guarantees that they try anyway. The little girl jumps onto one skate and immediately topples, giggling. You wince, but she's already back up, brushing snow from her braid. Vikings weren't much for coddling. Falling down was part of learning to stand. One of the adults, stacking firewood nearby, glances over. "Keep the rope out of the water," she calls. "Last year we lost one to the river." The children nod solemnly, then proceed to do exactly what she warned against. The sled skids onto thin ice and tips. The boy dives to grab it before it floats away. "Victory!" he shouts, raising the soggy sled like a war trophy. The woman shakes her head but smiles. "You'll make a sailor yet," she mutters. The boy beams. You crouch beside them as they inspect the damage. The runners are scraped raw, but the structure holds. The girl, frowning, touches the cracked antler patch. "Needs fixing," she says. Without hesitation, the boy pulls a small bone peg from his pouch and begins wedging it in. You realize he's mimicking something he's seen done 100 times. Repairing, adjusting, improvising. Even their tools are miniature versions of adult gear. Dull knives, scraps of rope, bits of metal. Historians still argue whether Viking children had play versions of tools or simply borrowed real ones under supervision. Some burial finds include small hammers and miniature axes, suggesting practice was encouraged from an early age. Dangerous? Absolutely. But so was life. As the day warms slightly, the children expand their play zone. One starts dragging a smaller child on the sled, pretending to deliver firewood to the Jarl's hall. They pass bundles of twigs, shouting orders in exaggerated deep voices. A younger sibling, too small to join, toddles after them carrying a chunk of frozen bread like its treasure. The whole scene feels like a rehearsal for adulthood, half parody, half prophecy. At one point, the sled tips again and the bread flies into the snow. "Raid lost," the boy announces dramatically. Everyone bursts into laughter, including you. They regroup under a birch tree, passing the sled around like a shared secret. The older ones show the younger how to tie knots and wrap the rope over the shoulders for better leverage. It's clumsy but effective. The simplicity of it all humbles you. No plastic, no wheels, no rules. Just gravity, wood, and endless curiosity. You watch one girl crouch by the sled, tracing her finger along the grain of the wood. "This was from the old ship," she says softly. "Father said the sea still lives inside." Her tone is matter-of-fact, not mystical. In her mind, the sea simply belongs to the wood the way breath belongs to lungs. You glance at the sled again and see it differently now, not just a toy, but a vessel of stories. Maybe it really did come from an old ship plank, cut down after some storm wrecked it on the shore. A piece of travel reborn as play. There's poetry in that. When the sun begins to dip, the children gather everything: sled, cart, wooden cow, ropes. Their hands are red, their faces wind-bound, but their spirits unbroken. They line up for one last run down the slope, a chaotic race of sleds and feet and flailing arms. They crash gloriously at the bottom, dissolving into snow and laughter. As they trudge home, dragging their toys behind them, the sound echoes faintly against the hills, the creak of wood, the swish of snow, the chatter of small voices fading into dusk. You trail after them, boots crunching softly, feeling the day's weight settle like a warm blanket. Maybe, you think, this is how resilience is born. Not from battles or sermons, but from sled rides, bruises, and shared laughter. From learning that falling isn't failure, it's part of the story. And as you reach the longhouse again, the sled leans against the wall, dripping and battered, ready for tomorrow. Just like its makers. The next morning opens with a soft crackle in the air, the kind that promises snow. Smoke snakes lazily from the longhouse roofs, curling toward a sky the color of pewter. You follow the faint clang of something metallic, and soon enough, you find a small group of children near the smithy, bundled in fur and excitement. They are not here to forge weapons. No, they are here to watch their father, or maybe everyone's uncle, judging by how they swarm him, hammer out toy swords. The blacksmith is enormous, beard frosted white, hands steady as stone. He shapes glowing metal with the patience of a glacier. Each strike sends a shiver of light through the gray morning. Sparks leap, hiss, vanish. The children gasp like it's magic. And in a way, it is. One boy holds up a stick and shouts, "Mine's sharper." The others laugh, brandishing their own wooden blades. Each one is unique, some carved smooth and sanded, others hacked roughly with uneven handles. One has a pommel shaped like a dragon's head. Another is wrapped in faded cloth like a warrior's relic. The blacksmith doesn't scold their play. Instead, he glances down, amused. "Wood safer," he says. "For now." The boy frowns, squints at his stick, then nods solemnly. But one day, the man grins. "Aye. One day." You stand back and watch them spar. Their swings are wild, exaggerated, half bravery, half theater. They make the sounds themselves, the ching of clashing blades, the ooh of heroic defeat. The smallest child collapses dramatically into the snow, declaring, "Tell my goat I love her." The rest roar with laughter. There's something deeply human in it, this instinct to turn everything into story. Even combat becomes performance, danger softened into play. And you realize that while Viking childhoods were hard, they weren't joyless. They found ways to make fear into fun. Historians still argue whether wooden swords were common toys or just imagination with sticks. Some archaeological finds suggest small training weapons made from hardwood, while others claim children simply mimicked adult gestures with whatever they found. Either way, what mattered wasn't the object, it was the pretending. "Remember your shield arm," says the blacksmith, handing one child a round scrap of wood. "The enemy won't wait for you to find it." The child nods solemnly, though his shield is clearly an old lid. He raises it proudly and declares, "None shall pass." Within moments, they are reenacting raids and rescues across the yard, slipping on ice and shouting commands that sound suspiciously like gibberish. Yet amid the chaos, a pattern emerges: flanking, defense, retreat. It's all instinct now. What starts as play morphs into reflex. You spot one girl off to the side, carving her own sword with a dull knife. Her tongue sticks out in concentration. The handle is rough, but the balance, not bad. When she finishes, she tests the swing, then calls, "Let me fight." The boys pause. One laughs uncertainly. "You're too small." She raises her sword. "Then fight small." What follows is both ridiculous and glorious. She lunges like a cat, he stumbles, and the next thing you know, she's standing over him with her sword raised in triumph. "Victory!" she cries. The blacksmith throws his head back and laughs. "By Odin's beard, I think she means it." He kneels beside her, inspects the weapon, nods approvingly. "Good weight. But see, If you carve the hilt this way, you won't blister. She watches carefully as he shows her. The moment is quiet, reverent almost, a lesson disguised as banter. Historians still argue how much formal training Viking children received. Were boys and girls taught separately? Did they learn by imitation or instruction? No one's certain. But here, it's clear that knowledge flows through watching, copying, laughing, and doing. It's not school, it's inheritance. The children soon invent new rules for their swordplay. If you fall, you must sing before rejoining. If you win, you must declare something ridiculous like "I'm the Goat King." By now, everyone's giggling too hard to take the game seriously, which, paradoxically, makes it perfect. You notice one boy with a particularly battered sword, its edge splintered. He sits apart, frustrated. The blacksmith wanders over, kneels, and holds out a new piece of ash wood. "You can make another," he says. "But make it your way this time." The boy looks up, surprised. "Really?" The man nods. "That's how we all start, fixing what we broke." It hits you, the quiet wisdom buried in the noise. These aren't just games. They are practice in resilience, patience, and creativity. Every toy here is a story of rebuilding. Later, as the sun leans low, the children gather near the fire pit, their swords planted upright in the snow like little monuments. They tell wild tales of their battles, how one fought a troll the size of a whale, another defended a chicken fortress, another journeyed to a land made of cheese. The adults listen, half amused, half admiring. The blacksmith finally stands, stretches, and says, "Enough war. Time to eat." Groans of protest. "But we just found the troll's gold," one insists. "Then eat before it melts," the man replies, without missing a beat. The children collapse in laughter, even as they obey. As they leave, one child lingers behind, staring at his sword stuck in the snow. He doesn't take it inside, just pats it once, as if promising to return. The snow starts to fall again, soft and quiet, layering over the small wooden blades until they look like sleeping relics. You stand there for a while, listening to the muffled laughter from inside the longhouse. Somewhere in that warmth, they are retelling the day's adventures, turning splinters and snow into legend. Tomorrow, they'll carve new swords, fight new monsters, and learn a little more about the weight of their own hands. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be there too, watching the spark that turns play into history. By mid-morning the next day, the longhouse smells faintly of drying fish, smoke, and wool, an oddly comforting blend that makes the air feel thicker, older. The adults are busy patching sails and mending boots, but the children have vanished again, leaving only muddy prints and a trail of giggles outside the door. You follow them into the clearing near the river, where a small crowd has formed around something new. At first you think they've discovered treasure. Then you realize it's a small wooden boat, no longer than your arm, riding proudly in the shallow water. The children cheer every time it rocks upright instead of sinking. A girl kneels beside it, blowing gently across its tiny carved sail. "She flies," she says, as though she's commanding a real ship. It's astonishingly detailed. Someone's father must have carved it from leftover pine. The prow curls upward in the shape of a serpent. The planks are etched to mimic ship seams, and even the little mast has crossbeams tied with horsehair string. You can almost see the real thing in it, the broad curves of a longship, its shadows slicing through fog, its sails swollen with wind. "Mine doesn't float like that," says another child, holding up a smaller, lumpier model that immediately tips sideways. "That's because you put too many warriors in," someone teases. Sure enough, inside are little wooden figures, each the size of a thumb, some painted with charcoal helmets. The maker frowns, flicks one overboard. "Now it's lighter." He grins. The weak must swim. The laughter that follows is bright, echoing off the water. You crouch beside them, watching the miniature armada set sail, half of them listing badly, one running aground, another drifting majestically downstream. The river carries it in slow circles, glinting in the pale sunlight. Historians still argue whether Viking children had toy ships for play or for ritual learning. Archaeologists have found small wooden vessels in graves and near coastal settlements, some crudely made, others beautifully crafted. Were they offerings to sea gods, or the toys of children whose lives revolved around water? Nobody knows for sure. But here, watching them lean over the riverbank, you can't help but feel the answer is both. One boy, older and confident, shouts, "Race you to the bend." Immediately, chaos. Dozens of tiny boats are shoved into the current, everyone yelling over one another. Someone's captain gets stuck on a rock, another child tries to nudge it free with a stick, overbalances, and splashes knee-deep into the freezing water. The shock makes him shriek, but he's laughing before you can worry. His friends haul him out by the hood, scolding and grinning in equal measure. The race continues. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of pine and something briny from far off, the memory of the sea itself. The lead boat, the one with the carved serpent, sails steadily forward, its reflection trembling. The girl who made it follows along the bank, murmuring like a captain giving orders. When her ship wins, barely, she raises both arms in victory. The sea serpent conquers all. Her brother rolls his eyes. It cheated. The wind likes you. Then the wind has taste, she replies, with the kind of smugness only siblings can achieve. You notice how easily these children speak of ships, as though they are people, friends, even ancestors. In a way, they are. Their fathers and mothers build them, row them, live and die by them. For these children, the sea isn't a distant thing, it's destiny in liquid form. The girl sits cross-legged now, repairing a snapped mast with calm precision. You realize she's learned that from watching the adults repair nets. Small hands, big mimicry. A stick becomes a sail boom, a strand of her own hair becomes rope. You can almost feel her mind at work, measuring, adjusting, imagining. Historians still argue whether Viking girls participated in seafaring or shipbuilding. Some point to burial finds of female warriors, others to sagas describing women captaining trading vessels. But here, that debate seems beside the point. She's not asking permission to imagine, she's already doing it. Soon the play turns serious. The children start naming their ships after animals, heroes, even insults. "The Cow of Doom," one shouts. "The Mighty Puddle," replies another. A third child solemnly christens his "the Floating Potato," then blows dramatically on its sail. You try not to laugh, but fail quietly. The boats begin another race, though this time the rules have changed. Now the goal is survival, not speed. Whoever's ship travels the farthest without capsizing wins. The current is stronger near the center, tugging them toward open water. The children lean forward, breath held. "Go, go, go," someone whispers, as if the ships can hear. Only one remains upright by the end, the sea serpent again, steady as a heartbeat. "She's blessed," says a smaller boy, wide-eyed. "Maybe the gods like her." The girl shrugs, though you can tell she likes the idea. When the race ends, the group works together to retrieve their ships, fishing them out with branches and ropes. They laugh at the ones that sank, hold funerals for the ones that broke, and promise to rebuild. Even in this, you see the Norse spirit. Failure isn't shameful, only unfinished. Back on shore, the girl scrapes river mud off her boat. "Next time," she says, "we build bigger." The others nod. "With sails of cloth," one adds. "And shields," says another. Someone else chimes in, and fire-breathing dragons. You grin. This is how innovation begins, through play that doesn't know it's engineering. By the time the sun begins to fade, the boats are lined up neatly on the bank, drying in the cold air. They look like a fleet waiting for orders, ready to conquer puddles and ponds alike. The children's breath steams in the dusk as they gather their treasures, voices softening now that the race is over. One boy turns back toward the river and whispers something, too quiet to hear, but his expression gives it away. Gratitude. Maybe to the river. Maybe to the boat. Maybe to both. You walk back with them, the rhythmic squeak of boots on snow the only sound. Behind you, the river flows on, carrying flecks of wooden memory toward the distant sea. You can almost imagine those toy ships sailing forever, guided by unseen hands, never quite sinking. And for a brief moment, you understand what play meant here, not escape, but rehearsal for wonder. The sky the next morning is a pale wash of gold and gray, the kind of light that makes the frost look like crushed glass scattered across the ground. The village stirs slowly, dogs shake themselves awake, smoke drifts from roof holes, and someone somewhere hums a tune that sounds older than language. But the children are already up, scampering between the huts, chasing one another with the kind of purpose that only aimless play can have. You follow them beyond the last fence, where a wide meadow lies frozen but not silent. There's a group gathered around a circle scratched into the snow. Inside, something clacks, bounces, and rolls, a game of bones. At first, it looks like chaos. Small hand-sized pieces fly across the ice, landing in the circle or skittering past. Then you see the pattern. The children are playing with knuckle bones, carved smooth from sheep or goat joints, sometimes painted with little symbols. The rules shift every few throws. Sometimes the goal is to make them land upright, sometimes to knock over someone else's piece, sometimes just to catch them midair. Your turn, a freckled boy calls, tossing a set to a girl who's clearly the reigning champion. She narrows her eyes, shakes her hands for dramatic effect, then flicks the bones skyward. They rise, glint, tumble down. One lands perfectly upright. A collective ooh ripples through the group. You crouch down, feeling the frost bite your knees. The bones are surprisingly elegant, smooth, polished, warm to the touch from handling. A few have tiny carved runes on them, not full words, just lucky marks. You imagine parents or older siblings etching those symbols, believing they might bring skill or fortune. Historians still argue whether these bone games were pure amusement or tied to divination. Some say children learned to toss bones for fun, only to grow up using similar sets for casting omens. Others claim there was never a line between the two. Games and rituals were both ways of asking fate to reveal its mood. Come on, the girl says, holding out a bone to you. You try. You hesitate, then throw. It clatters wildly, bouncing off the line. The children erupt into laughter. Terrible, someone cries. Even the goats would laugh at that. You bow theatrically, accepting defeat. It earns you a few approving nods. Humility, it seems, is a crowd pleaser here. The game evolves again. Now they've stacked the bones into little towers, competing to knock them down with snowballs. Accuracy meets chaos. One boy's throw veers completely off target, hitting another player in the shoulder instead. That's war, the victim declares, scooping up snow in retaliation. Within seconds, the game dissolves into an all-out snow battle. You duck instinctively as a snowball whizzes past your head. The air fills with laughter and flying frost. For every ouch, there's a triumphant shout. The energy is pure, wild, unstoppable. Even the older children join in, ambushing from behind a half-fallen log. It's training, yes, but mostly it's joy. Historians still argue whether Viking snow fights were recorded anywhere. though sagas occasionally describe children playing battle during winter. Given how much these kids relish flinging frozen projectiles, you'd bet your mittens it was a seasonal tradition. Eventually, everyone collapses into the snow, breathless and steaming like little fires in the cold. Someone declares, "Peace." Another counters, "Only till spring." They giggle, truce accepted. When the excitement fades, the group returns to the knucklebones. Now the tone is calmer, focused. A few of the older ones kneel together, arranging bones in specific shapes, lines, spirals, even a crude ship outline. You notice they murmur as they work, repeating something under their breath. You can't make out the words, but the rhythm feels ritualistic. "Are you summoning sea spirits?" you ask quietly. The girl who beat you earlier shakes her head. "No. We're telling the story of the river." She points at the spiral. "That's where it begins, near the mountain. And here," she taps a cluster of bones, "is where it meets the sea." So the bones are maps now. Worlds in miniature. The others nod, adding little stick figures, a tiny fish bone for a boat, a curved line scratched into snow for waves. The game has transformed again, and you realize this is how stories survive, not through writing, but through play. One boy points to a cluster of bones on the shore. "That's where the serpent sleeps," he says. Another adds, "And that's where we steal its eggs." The tale builds like a wave, each child adding a detail, no one contradicting, everyone believing just enough. Historians still argue how much of Viking mythology began in formal storytelling versus casual imagination like this. Maybe sagas were once playground legends polished by time and repetition. Maybe the great epics of gods and giants started as games played with bones in the snow. The sun slips behind the clouds, the light fading into silver. The air hums with that soft pre-snow silence again. You sit among them, watching as they scatter the bones one last time, letting the pieces fall however they will. "That's what the gods decide," the girl says quietly. You think about that, the balance between play and fate, laughter and reverence. These children don't separate them. To them, every game carries a whisper of meaning, and every moment of fun is a conversation with something larger. They gather their knuckle bones, tuck them into pouches made from worn leather, and start heading back. The meadow is marked with footprints, scattered bones, and the ghostly outlines of their stories. Soon, snow will fall and erase it all. But for now, it's a record of imagination, etched briefly into the earth. As you walk behind them, you can't help but feel lighter. Maybe that's what these toys were always meant to do, not just teach, or train, or predict, but to remind everyone that even in the harshest world, play keeps the heart soft enough to survive it. Evening rolls in on a hush of falling snow, thick flakes drifting down like ashes from some slow, white fire. The longhouse glows faintly from within, amber through the gaps in the timber walls, and you can hear the muffled rhythm of weaving looms and low conversation. Inside, warmth presses against you like a blanket. The fire in the central hearth pops, sending sparks up into the smoke hole, and a few of the village's smaller children lie sprawled on furs, their toys scattered like evidence of a small wooden rebellion. A girl is plucking at a toy horse, its carved manner slightly uneven. She makes it gallop across the rug, then stop to drink from a bowl of melted snow. Beside her, a boy holds a smaller animal, a goat, probably, though it looks more like a lumpy dog, and proudly declares, "Mine eats anything." He demonstrates by ramming the goat into a stray scrap of wall. You can't help but chuckle softly. Wooden animals, you realize, might be the most common toys in the settlement. You've seen them everywhere, in corners, under benches, poking from pockets. Most are crudely carved, but some are miniature works of art, detailed enough to show ribs, saddles, even tiny bridles made from twine. Each one is alive in the mind of its owner, trotting, leaping, or occasionally flying when no one's watching. Historians still argue what these wooden creatures meant beyond play. Some think they were simple imitations of the livestock that shaped daily life. Others suggest they carried spiritual weight, practice for caring, symbols of fortune, or even offerings disguised as toys. Whatever their purpose, they clearly carried stories. One older child, perhaps 9 or 10, kneels near the fire, setting up a miniature farmstead in the ash. She draws lines for fences, piles tiny pebbles for houses, and places her herd carefully inside. "Keep them safe," she mutters to the smallest child nearby, handing him a carved dog. "If the wolves come, you know what to do." The boy salutes solemnly, eyes wide with responsibility. You sit quietly, watching the play unfold. The girl rearranges her figures, narrating under her breath like a tiny saga teller. "The cow gave milk today," she says, moving a painted figure. "The goat escaped. Again. The sheep are lazy. The dog will fix it." Her voice is half serious, half drowsy chant, like she's learning the rhythm of adult speech by pretending to command it. A gust of wind sneaks in through the cracks. The fire bends. She frowns, adjusting one of the toy animals to face the flames. "He's scared," she whispers. The small boy beside her copies her, turning his toy dog toward the same direction. They sit like that for a moment, two little guardians of their imagined world, protecting carved wood from invisible wolves. You remember what one archaeologist once said, "A toy is a rehearsal for control in a world where a child has none." It fits perfectly here. In a land where nature rules everything, storm, hunger, darkness, these small acts of make-believe are rebellions of hope. The older girl suddenly decides it's spring. "The grass grows again," she announces, scattering bits of dried moss across her toy pasture. The boy claps. "The goat, you're told, has new kids, though you don't see any. They're invisible," he explains solemnly, as if that should be obvious. Laughter ripples around the fire. Even the adults pause their mending to glance over, smiling quietly. One woman murmurs, "You'll be a fine storyteller someday." The girl doesn't answer, but her face glows. Historians still argue whether storytelling in Viking culture was learned through listening or imitation. It's possible that for many, it began like this, in play, in pretend, in speaking aloud to wooden animals that never argued back. The children's little farmstead grows elaborate. Soon, they've added a river made of melted snow, a bridge from bark, a forest of pine cones. Another child joins, contributing her own carved ox. "Mine can pull a cart," she declares, dragging a small wooden box behind it. "Then pull it," someone teases, and she does, solemnly circling the fire pit like a parade of one. "Where's it going?" asks a boy. "To trade in the next village," she replies. "For honey." "Bring me some," another shouts. "If you help guard the road," she counters. The negotiations begin immediately. The whole thing becomes a bustling economy of imagination. Traders, guards, farmers, herders. They barter stones for pretend milk, scraps of fur for cheese, a pine cone for a very rare egg. You feel like you're watching civilization replay itself in miniature. A toddler, too young to join the conversation, crawls between the players and snatches a wooden sheep, gnawing on its head. The others groan. "The baby raids again," cries someone. "Quick, hide the treasures." They scoop up their animals, giggling, and the raider beams proudly, oblivious to her notoriety. When things finally calm, the older girl resumes her story. Her herd survives the winter, the wolves are driven away, and the farm prospers. But then, dramatic pause, the snow spirits return. She blows gently across the toy landscape, scattering ashes and moss. The animals must find shelter. Instantly, the others follow her lead, huddling their figures close, whispering about keeping them warm. You can almost see it happen, the transition from simple play to myth. Their world is half real, half symbolic, but entirely theirs. It's how the Viking mind must have worked, always balancing survival with story, labor with legend. Historians still argue whether Norse children truly understood the deeper beliefs behind their parents' rituals, how much they absorbed from hearing about gods and giants while playing in the dirt. But watching these children, it's clear they're already rehearsing the language of reverence, empathy, and fate, just with smaller stakes and funnier endings. At last, the fire burns low. One by one, the children tuck their wooden animals beside them, like small wooden pets. The girl brushes soot off her favorite horse, whispers, "Rest now. We'll ride again." Then she yawns, curls up beside it, and drifts off almost instantly. You lean back, the crackle of the last embers filling the silence. The carved creatures rest in the firelight, tiny silhouettes of life paused mid-motion. Around them, the adults murmur softly, sewing and stirring, their own movements not so different from play, careful, repetitive, full of purpose. Somewhere in that fading glow, you feel the echo of the day, the games, the laughter, the seriousness of pretending. Wooden horses become real. Wooden goats learn to talk. And through it all, something precious survives, the ability to imagine warmth even when the world outside freezes. Morning seeps back into the longhouse like a quiet visitor. Smoke hangs low, carrying the earthy smell of peat, wool, and faint milk. You stretch, listening to the creak of wood under shifting bodies, the first whispers of chores being remembered. Outside, the snow has thinned to a crusted layer, pale as whalebone. A small hand brushes your sleeve. It's the same girl from last night, clutching her carved horse again. Only this time, she isn't playing. She's polishing. The toy has changed overnight. Someone, perhaps her father, has sanded the edges smoother, darkened it with oil, and scratched faint lines into the wood to resemble reins. The girl runs her fingers over it reverently, as if she's meeting an ancestor. You realize this little horse isn't just a plaything anymore. It's a bridge, between childhood and memory, between games and legacy. In Viking households, toys often endured far longer than their owners' first years. Archaeologists have found pieces so worn they look like stones, yet still unmistakably shaped by love. A bear missing one leg, a boat smoothed thin as paper, a doll whose face was kissed clean off. To modern eyes, they seem trivial. But here, they are heirlooms, the wooden echoes of family stories passed hand to hand. The girl's father, a big man with braids streaked in frost, notices you watching. He crouches beside her, voice low but proud. "That was mine," he says. "My father carved it. See that notch? He said it was from a wolf bite. Probably my teeth." He grins. The girl laughs softly, tracing the mark like a relic. Then, with no ceremony at all, he presses the horse into her palm. "Yours now." The moment feels so casual you almost miss the weight of it. No music, no ritual, just a small act of continuity wrapped in morning chill. You sense she'll never forget it. Historians still argue whether Viking parents intentionally made keepsake toys, or if such heirlooms simply survived by accident. Yet patterns emerge. Objects reused across generations, repaired, redded, even buried with their last child owner. In graves near Hedeby and Birka, small wooden animals rest beside bones, companions for journeys beyond frost. Some archaeologists whisper that parents hoped the toys would guide their children safely through the mist to wherever the gods received them. But this morning isn't about death. It's about survival, continuity in a place where every winter is a test. The girl wraps her new old horse in a scrap of fur and tucks it into a pouch at her side before following her father outside. The sky is blue steel, the ground frozen glitter. They walk to the edge of the field, where smoke from the forge rises. The men are sharpening blades, repairing sleds, and patching oars. The girl lingers, pulling her horse from its pouch, letting it inspect the work like a tiny foreman. Her father doesn't scold. He just nods to another man and says, "She's already learning." It's true. Play and practice blur here. Every carved animal, every miniature ship teaches rhythm, patience, and reverence for craft. A child polishing a toy learns the same gestures that will one day polish a sword. A boy pretending to steer his wooden boat learns how to watch the wind. A girl pretending to mend her doll's dress learns the calm of repair. Later, as they return, you notice another child, an older boy, kneeling by the longhouse wall. He's repairing a smaller toy, a miniature axe with a cracked handle. He tests the balance carefully, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Can't break it again," he mutters. "It was grandfather's." The phrase catches you. Grandfathers. The idea that even a small wooden axe could connect 3 generations says everything about how these people measured time, not in years, but in use. Nearby, an elderly woman sits in the doorway, combing flax. She's humming a tune that feels older than language. You ask about her song. She smiles, eyes half clouded, and says it's a lullaby for her grandchildren, the same one her mother sang back when the fjord froze harder. She pauses, as if tasting the memory, then adds, "We don't keep time. We keep stories." That, you realize, is what the toys really are. Portable stories, softened by generations of fingers. Even the simplest figure carries layers of meaning invisible to outsiders. The story of who carved it, who played with it, who lost it, who found it again. Historians still argue whether such toys ever took on spiritual significance. Some suggest children's play was sacred in itself, an imitation of divine creation, the small echo of God's shaping worlds from chaos. Others think it was purely domestic, a quiet part of family rhythm. But as the morning unfolds, it seems impossible to separate one from the other. The girl's mother calls her back inside. The wooden horse disappears beneath her cloak, but you can hear it rattle faintly as she runs. When she reaches the hearth, she sits near her grandmother and starts carving a new toy of her own. Not perfect, not symmetrical, but patient. Her small blade shaves curls of birch that fall like blonde hair onto the floor. The grandmother watches with a secret smile, humming that same lullaby. When the horse takes shape, the girl compares it to her father's gift, older and smoother. "Mine looks funny," she says. "Good," the grandmother replies. "That means it's yours." In that moment, you see how time bends here. The line between past and present folds inward, and the rhythm of life is whittled, polished, passed forward like the toy itself. A wooden horse is never just wood. Its continuity carved by hand, touched by love, carried through winters that would have swallowed lesser things. The fire crackles. The girl continues carving, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth, determined to make the horse's head just right. Somewhere outside, you hear the echo of waves. The sea waits, as it always does. But in this warm cocoon of wood and smoke, eternity feels small enough to hold in your palm. The day folds itself into rain, thin, silvery streaks pattering softly against the longhouse roof. You sit near the hearth again, its glow pulsing through the damp air like a heartbeat. Around you, the adults murmur in low voices, mending nets, scraping hides, stirring pots. But the children, those restless, brilliant creatures, are once more gathering their toys, ready to turn another evening into adventure. A few coals flare, and the shadows of wooden horses and boats stretch long and tall across the floorboards. The girl from before settles herself on a fur rug, her old horse on one side, her newly carved one on the other. Across from her, a boy places his tiny boat in a shallow wooden bowl half filled with rainwater. "The sea's rough tonight," he says, rocking it gently. You can almost hear the story forming before anyone speaks. One by one, the children arrange their toys, animals, dolls, even a few bones pretending to be sea monsters. Soon, the hearth's perimeter becomes a stage. The smoke twists upward like a curtain, and someone begins to narrate in a slow, dramatic whisper. Once, in the land of ice and thunder, a ship set sail for glory. The others join in, voices overlapping, laughter bubbling up between lines. Wooden warriors clatter into battle. Dolls are rescued from dragons made of rolled-up cloth, and every sound, the hiss of fire, the tap of wood, adds texture to the unfolding saga. You can't help smiling. It's bedtime theater, Viking style. A younger boy introduces a talking goat named Snorri who refuses to cross bridges without compliments. "You must praise me first," he insists in a squeaky falsetto. The others groan, but oblige. "Oh mighty Snorri, your beard is magnificent." The goat, satisfied, hops forward proudly. Historians still argue whether storytelling among Norse children directly mimicked the oral traditions of their elders, or whether it evolved separately in these small domestic circles. What's certain is that this, right here, is the seed of saga culture. Long before professional skalds composed in smoky halls, children whispered legends to one another by firelight, with toys as their actors. The rain outside deepens, drumming on the roof like a soft drumbeat. One of the older children, his imagination clearly running wild, declares that their toy ship has reached the edge of the world. He tips the bowl slightly, sending it sliding toward disaster. "Beware!" someone yells. The Midgard serpent waits below. A doll is immediately sacrificed. "She fell," cries a voice. "She's gone forever." But another child shakes her head. "No. She became a fish." "Half fish, half hero," adds another, with the confidence of a director who refuses rewrites. The story shifts tone again, looping between tragedy and comedy like all good myths. The girl with the horses gallops them to the rescue, their tiny hooves clacking softly on the boards. The battle that follows is fierce, illogical, and magnificent. Wooden beasts collide, boats capsize, dolls faint dramatically. The children laugh until tears glint in the firelight. You notice how naturally the rhythm of Norse storytelling lives in them. Their saga keeps circling back. Heroes die, heroes return, the world trembles but endures. Even at 6 or 7, they understand that no story ever truly ends. It just changes shape, like waves reshaping sand. A sudden draft gusts through the room. The flame wavers, and smoke curls low, turning every face into something half-dreamed. The oldest child, a girl with braids and soot-smudged cheeks, lowers her voice. "And then," she says, "the gods looked down and saw what the children had made. They said, 'Let them tell stories, for stories are what keep the dark away.'" The room falls quiet. Even the adults pause their work to listen. For a long moment, only the rain speaks. Then someone giggles softly, breaking the spell. One of the mothers tosses a small bone across the floor. "The dragon awakens," she teases. The younger children scream in mock terror, scattering. "Quick!" shouts the boy with the boat. "To the ship!" They scramble to rescue their wooden heroes again, the laughter rolling back through the longhouse like a warm tide. You think about what these nights must have meant for them, children growing up in a land of danger and distance, learning early that joy must be made, not found. Their toys were stage props, training tools, emotional anchors. They practiced bravery here long before they'd need it outside, where the sea was real and the storms didn't end in applause. Historians still argue whether Viking families saw play as trivial or essential. Some writings suggest fathers scolded idle games, others imply they joined in. Perhaps both were true, depending on the season, the hunger, the heart. Tonight, at least, everyone seems content to let the world shrink to this warm circle of laughter and smoke. When the storm finally begins to fade, so do the voices. One by one, the little storytellers drift closer to the hearth, heads nodding, hands loosening their grip on their wooden heroes. A few toys tumble from small fingers, ships run aground, warriors fall asleep mid-quest, a goat quietly topples onto its side. An older woman hums softly, maybe the same lullaby you heard before. Her voice threads through the sound of the rain like a gentle current. You catch fragments of Old Norse words that sound like blessings. Outside, thunder rumbles faintly in the distance, less a threat now, more a sigh. The children curl together beneath wool blankets, their toys tucked close, as if the stories will continue in dreams. You lean back, listening to the hearth pop and the steady breathing of sleep. The longhouse feels smaller, safer, more human than ever. And as your own eyes grow heavy, you realize that in this place, imagination isn't an escape from reality, it's a rehearsal for surviving it. Centuries pass in the blink of an ember. The longhouse fades, the laughter of children becomes an echo you can't quite place. Then, dust, cold light, and a faint metallic scrape. You're standing in a trench of grey earth, somewhere in Scandinavia. A voice rings out, "Found something." The sound is sharper than the crack of a Viking hearth. It's a modern trowel against stone. The archaeologist crouches, brushing away centuries of soil from a small wooden object. It's fragile, curved at one end, still holding the ghost of its maker's knife marks. A toy ship. The others gather close, murmuring. Cameras click, notebooks open. You watch their hands, so careful, almost reverent, as they lift the tiny vessel onto a padded tray. It's astonishing that wood could survive this long at all. The oxygen-poor mud of an ancient harbor has preserved it, a miracle of silt and time. Could be 10th century, someone says. Looks like oak. Child's toy, maybe. Another voice, older and skeptical, replies, or a votive offering. Hard to say. Historians still argue whether such miniature boats were for play or for prayer. Were they just toys a child lost in the mud, or sacred gifts meant to ask the gods for safe voyages? The evidence is delicate, ambiguous, frustratingly human. You kneel beside the archaeologists, imagining the original owner, some wide-eyed child crouched by the water's edge, sailing their tiny ship across puddles. Maybe they laughed when the wind caught it, maybe they cried when it sank. Maybe it was a toy that became an offering simply because it slipped from small fingers and never returned. They photograph it carefully from every angle. In the lab, they'll analyze its wood grain, compare it to planks from real Viking ships, trace the tool marks. Already, theories swirl. See the curve, says one researcher. That's intentional. A child couldn't have carved that. So you're saying it's symbolic? Possibly ceremonial. Or maybe, a younger voice suggests, it was just a kid with talent. You smile inwardly. Some debates never change. In a museum months later, the ship sits behind glass. It's smaller than you imagined, barely the length of a forearm. Yet it feels immense, a portal to an entire vanished childhood. Visitors drift by, whispering about Vikings, sagas, battles, longships. Few notice the quieter artifact, the small proof that even raiders and explorers once played pretend. A mother points it out to her child, who presses their nose to the glass. It's a toy boat, she says softly. Just like yours. The child nods, wide-eyed, and something unbroken passes between centuries: recognition. Historians still argue about what this kind of connection means. Is it sentimentality, or the truest form of understanding? One school insists that toys are cultural clues, reflections of social structure. Another calls them emotional fossils, capturing feelings that rarely survive the written record. You suspect both are right. Elsewhere, another excavation reveals a carved wooden animal, half bear, half horse, unearthed from what was once a child's burial mound. Its eyes are worn smooth. The archaeologist cradles it as if afraid it might crumble. "Someone loved this," she whispers. You can feel the truth in that simple sentence more than in any academic paper. The grain of the wood still holds the warmth of hands long gone. Even through centuries of rotten ice, tenderness survives. That's the strange miracle of archaeology. The further you dig, the more you find fragments of ordinary affection. The spoon worn thin by feeding, the bead kept for luck, the toy dropped and buried by time. History, it turns out, isn't all kings and blood. It's also playtime and laughter, petrified in soil. One scholar, giving a lecture nearby, clicks through slides of these small wonders. The Norse world, she says, wasn't just made of warriors. It was made of children who dreamed of being them. Her voice catches for a moment, and the room falls silent. Later that evening, the museum closes. Lights dim. The glass reflects empty corridors and ghostly outlines of exhibits. You linger by the case containing the little ship. Its shadow stretches long and soft across the display shelf, as if sailing still. You imagine what it must have sounded like centuries ago: the slosh of water, the hum of wind, the small voice of a child commanding their fleet to glory. Then silence again, only the echo of the past refusing to fade. Historians still argue whether this human instinct, to play, to imagine, to build worlds inside our own, is a luxury or a survival tool. Looking at the tiny ship, it seems obvious. Play is practice for endurance. Even here, in the cold heart of time, that lesson still floats. A janitor walks by, whistling a tune that sounds oddly ancient. The echo bounces through the empty museum like a lullaby. You close your eyes, hearing the past and present hum together, soft and strange. Somewhere in the dark, the ship gleams faintly. Not gold, not glory, just polished memory. You find yourself drifting, not through space, but through memory itself. The sterile hum of the museum dissolves, replaced by the scent of resin, wool, and rain-soaked soil. You're walking through centuries, where laughter blurs into silence and back again. The Viking world flickers in and out like candlelight behind thin parchment. Before you stands a glass display filled with toys, wooden animals, spindle-shaped dolls, fragments of miniature sleds. Each one has a small printed label: Viking age, 9th to 11th century. The names of their owners are lost, yet somehow, their fingerprints remain in the shape of every curve and nick. Visitors move slowly through the gallery, their footsteps echoing like heartbeats. A child presses her palms to the glass, breath fogging the reflection. "They look like mine," she whispers to her father. He smiles. "They were someone's, a long time ago." You look closer at a wooden horse with a broken leg. Its simple form, barely more than a silhouette, carries the quiet ache of survival. Archaeologists might call it an artifact, but you can feel it's something else, a story frozen mid-sentence. It's as if the horse itself remembers running. Historians still argue whether such toys were meant to last or merely to serve until the next carving replaced them. Yet every one found tells the same truth: someone loved it enough to keep it close. Whether in a muddy yard, a burial mound, or the corner of a longhouse, these toys refuse to vanish. There's an exhibit board nearby, explaining that Viking toys were often discovered alongside domestic tools: needles, combs, spoons. The curator writes that such proximity reveals the overlap between play and work, between learning and living. You nod to yourself. That feels right. In a world where survival depended on imitation, play was education disguised as joy. The museum lights dim slightly, simulating torchlight. A faint soundscape begins, waves crashing, gulls calling, children laughing. The atmosphere is immersive, but it's not quite enough to capture the warmth of the real thing. You remember the longhouse fire, the smell of pine resin, the rhythmic scrape of a small knife carving a new toy. Those weren't sounds recorded in a studio, they were life itself. You close your eyes and listen. For a moment, the laughter doesn't sound like an effect, it sounds real. It's strange how much these small wooden things have endured when entire kingdoms did not. Empires rose and fell, languages evolved, ships rotted in harbors, but a few toys outlived them all. The smallest artifacts become the loudest whispers. One historian, in an interview you recall, once said, "The human story is told not by monuments, but by miniatures." She meant that our truest legacy isn't in temples or weapons, but in the quiet craft of care, something a child holds in their hands and believes alive. In another corner, a display features a reconstructed Viking child's room, half guesswork, half imagination. The walls are lined with woven mats, the floors sprinkled with straw. Toys lie in a tidy heap, a carved duck, a tiny wagon, a small spinning top. An actor's voice narrates softly from a hidden speaker. This was play, and practice, and prayer. The hands that made these toys shaped the world. Historians still argue whether such reconstructions romanticize the past, softening its hardships. It's a fair question. Life in that world was brutal. Children often didn't survive their first winters. Toys might have been the only softness they knew. But maybe that's why they mattered so deeply, why they carved, cared, and pretended. You glance around. Visitors murmur to one another, absorbed, moved. Some are smiling. A few children are pointing out how their toys today, plastic horses, Lego ships, aren't so different. You realize that connection is what endures most of all, the universality of play. And in that instant, something curious happens. The reflection in the glass shifts. For a heartbeat, you don't see the museum behind you. You see the longhouse again, glowing in the dark. The same wooden horse sits by the hearth, freshly carved. A child's hand reaches for it, giggles echo softly, and then, gone. The reflection returns to sterile white walls and museum glass. You exhale slowly. The centuries overlap perfectly for a second, like two waves meeting mid-ocean. Historians still argue whether memory is reliable, or if the act of remembering reshapes what once was. But standing here, you don't need proof. You feel it, the continuity of play, of imagination, of love expressed through small wooden gestures. A museum guide walks by, announcing closing time. The lights brighten slightly. People drift toward the exit, their voices fading. You stay behind just a moment longer, letting your eyes trace every grain, every crack, every remnant of warmth captured in oak and birch. You think of the children who once laughed around the fire, the parents who carved toys by lamplight, the archaeologists who brushed them from the earth, and the modern hands that now preserve them behind glass. Across 1,000 years, they are all connected, through wood, through story, through the simple act of giving shape to joy. You step away from the display, but the reflection follows. Somewhere deep in your chest, you feel the hum of time still running, steady as a heartbeat, soft as the sound of a toy horse's wooden hooves on a longhouse floor. Night gathers again, not in the museum this time, but in memory's own light. The years fold backward until the walls of glass and steel dissolve, and you are once more in that familiar longhouse, warmed by the glow of the hearth. The air smells of pine smoke and wet wool, of soup still bubbling in a clay pot. You hear soft breathing, grown-ups half asleep, children shifting beneath furs, toys scattered like little constellations across the floor. The day stories still linger in the air. You can almost taste them, sweet and smoky. A carved horse lies on its side near the fire, legs frozen mid-gallop. A wooden boat leans against the wall, its tiny prow glinting faintly. These are the last echoes of play, the day distilled into stillness. You walk among them carefully. The floorboards creak under your feet. A child stares, mumbling in her sleep, clutching her toy to her chest. The rhythm of her breathing matches the slow pulse of the coals. You can't help smiling. Even here, even in a world carved from cold and hunger, peace looks like this, small fingers gripping a wooden dream. Historians still argue whether Viking childhood offered comfort or simply resilience. Some say it was harsh beyond measure. Others, that it was rich with community warmth. The truth, as always, probably sits between those two fires. What's clear is that even when storms screamed outside and frost grew on window beams, children found a way to turn fear into story, boredom into invention. They carved joy from the same wood they burned for heat. A faint sound breaks the silence, the scraping of a knife. You turn. Near the hearth, an old man sits awake, carving by firelight. His hands move slowly, deliberately. Each curl of birch wood falls like a pale feather onto his lap. He doesn't speak, but you know what he's making. A new toy. Another life waiting to be imagined. He holds it up to the fire. It's not finished yet, but you can see the shape forming, a bird, wings spread wide. Perhaps it will never fly in the sky, but in a child's mind, it will cross oceans. He sets it beside the others and sighs contentedly, as though this tiny act is enough to keep the night itself at bay. Outside, the wind changes. You hear the distant groan of ice shifting on the fjord, a low, endless murmur like the earth breathing in its sleep. The longhouse seems to listen too. You sit down near the fire, where warmth seeps through fur and skin. You close your eyes, and the flicker of the flames paints stories on the inside of your eyelids. Children chasing wooden goats through mud, tiny ships gliding across puddles, dolls dancing in festival songs. It's not just history anymore. It's heartbeat, it's laughter, it's the pulse of everything that refuses to die. You think of all the children since then, scattered through time like seeds on wind. Roman, Egyptian, Inuit, modern, each one finding something ordinary to bring to life. A stick becomes a sword, a stone becomes a kingdom. The instinct is ancient and universal. To play is to hope. Historians still argue whether hope leaves evidence in the archaeological record. But you can feel it here, in the way the fire hums, the way a half-carved bird waits to be loved, the way this quiet house seems to cradle the future in its smoke-stained rafters. The night deepens. A hush falls over everything, thick and gentle. The flames shrink to embers. The children sleep on, untroubled, their toys scattered like loyal sentinels keeping watch. You realize, with a kind of ache, that you've come to the end of the story, not because it's finished, but because it's still happening, somewhere, in every small hand that holds a toy and imagines the world differently. The wind sighs through the gaps in the roof. You lie back, eyes half closed, the smell of pine and salt water drifting through the air. For a moment, you can almost believe you hear the sea, and the faint sound of laughter carried across it. And so, the Viking village fades, softly, like smoke rising to the stars. The toys remain where they were left, waiting for morning light to find them again. The story slows to a whisper now. The longhouse is gone, and only the rhythm of breath remains, yours, and the echo of small, ancient dreams. You can still picture the toys resting in their quiet places, a horse with one ear, a ship that once sailed puddles, a doll whose smile was carved by love. They belong to a world that should feel distant, yet somehow it doesn't. You drift through the dark like a traveler between centuries, carrying with you the warmth of their fire. The air cools, but softly, kindly. The noise of history fades to a hush. Every detail that once seemed sharp, wood grain, smoke, laughter, melts into something smooth, like water running over stone. The Viking children are asleep again. You can imagine them breathing, slow and steady, curled against their wooden companions. Outside, frost paints the earth in silver lines, and even the sea seems to rest. Let the images settle. The flicker of the hearth. The lull of rain. The small act of carving hope into something that fits a child's hand. These are the things that stay, even when the world changes. Breathe in, slow and deep. Breathe out, gentle and long. The story holds you the way the longhouse once held them, safe, warm, wrapped in the sound of quiet craft and fading fire. And when sleep finally comes, let it find you the way morning found them, peaceful, patient, carrying a dream carved carefully from the wood of yesterday.